County, the home of Yosemite, is rich in history and exquisite beauty. It is a delightful little place full of warm, down-home people that welcome visitors from all over the world to come to see their backyard. The Mariposa County Visitors Bureau is privileged to be able to help you visit us through this program.
When we reach the verdant valley and the winding mountain stream, see great cliffs and waterfalls pass in review. Find the skies by day all sunny and at night bedecked with stars, then we know that we are in Yosemite.
Well, here we are in Yosemite National Park, and this is going to be one of the most exciting days I have ever spent, because I have just found out that I'm going to be able to spend some time this morning with John Muir. Now, John Muir is one of the most legendary names in the history of Yosemite National Park. He's one of the most legendary names in the whole environmental movement in this country. But Scott, here in Yosemite, you know how important John Muir is. Can you share a little bit of his background, who he is, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed on why it's going to be such a big deal that I'm going to get to spend some time with him this morning?
Well, John Muir was a young man who was originally from Scotland, emigrated to the United States with his family and settled in the Wisconsin area. Came out to Yosemite in the 1860s and fell in love. He fell in love with the waterfalls and the mountains and the wildlife, and settled for a time here in Yosemite and wanted to extol its virtues to the world and tell everyone how important it was to preserve Yosemite. John Muir hosted visitors such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Theodore Roosevelt, and was just passionate about Yosemite and loved to share his passion and his joy about the park and the importance of preserving it. And so John Muir was really responsible for not only forming the Sierra Club, but a lot of people feel that he was the father of the modern conservation movement.
He was a writer who shared his writings of traveling through nature with the world. He became passionate about preserving the environment, and he really put this place and the whole sense of preserving the environment on everybody's radar screen, didn't he?
John Muir certainly was instrumental in getting the word out, not only about Yosemite, but the importance of preserving wild places. The whole concept of putting aside a piece of land just for its beauty and how remarkable it wasn't really part of the American idea. So John Muir not only is incredibly important here in Yosemite, but is important for saving wild places, not only in America, but throughout the world. A huge figure.
So literally, he was responsible for Yosemite National Park being here today. He was also largely responsible for convincing Teddy Roosevelt to kind of create what's today the National Park Service and set aside large areas of this country for national parks, and really just for raising everybody's consciousness. And this was all done by this guy from Scotland who came here not really knowing what he was getting into. This must have all been a surprise to him.
Exactly. And again, John Muir is somebody who, he had his passion and wanted to tell people, and it wasn't just enough for him to enjoy it and to soak in the beauty. He needed everybody to know. And as you mentioned, a writer, an illustrator, a botanist. John Muir was just incredibly important here in Yosemite, and we all owe a lot to him. And we look around a place like Yosemite or other wild places, Sequoia, Kings Canyon, and a lot of that can be traced back to the passion and the hard work of John Muir.
The conviction and the stubbornness, he wouldn't let go of this idea. This became his passion.
Exactly. And although John Muir didn't spend his entire life in here, he continued to come back, and he considered Yosemite the most beautiful place in the world, and it just was so important to him on every level. And people today owe a great deal of gratitude to John Muir, and we're certainly thankful that he felt so passionately about this park.
Wow, I am so excited to meet this man. There's so many questions I want to ask him. This is going to be a real treat. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
We're getting ready to have an absolutely wonderful day here in Yosemite with the man himself, John Muir. On this beautiful morning here in Yosemite National Park, I have this amazing opportunity to spend the morning with John Muir. And Mr. Muir, there are so many questions that I'm just itching to ask you, so many questions that I think anyone would have if they had the opportunity to spend time with you. This place is so special to you, but really you kind of got here by accident, didn't you?
Well, I did, in a sense, and in fact a specific accident really impelled my interest in things other than what I was living at the time. When I became temporarily blinded in an industrial accident in Indianapolis. I was happy then in the world of invention and industry, but I decided that after this temporary blindness that the inventions of a creation were infinitely more interesting to me. And so I headed off on what was then called my 1,000-mile walk from Louisville, Kentucky to Tennessee, and all the way down to the Cedar Key in Florida. My intention really was to walk all the way down to South America and to find a place to build a raft, put it into the Amazon River, and to float the entire length of the Amazon. But fortunately, perhaps for Yosemite, in Florida, I was stricken down with a fever, probably malaria, which so weakened me that going further south to the tropics seemed a poor idea. And so I popped on a ship to Panama, walked across the isthmus. Of course, we didn't have the canal in those days, and slipped up to San Francisco, where I asked the first person I met the wildest place he knew of. He pointed in this general direction, and I walked up here.
Not knowing what in the world you were getting into. Can you remember when you first saw this place? And did you know at that moment that you were onto something?
Well, I was pretty much impressed by my first view of the Sierra Nevada, which I saw from down in the Bay Area. And in those days, the Sierra Nevada struck me as what it should have been called, perhaps, the range of light, and I first coined that when I first viewed it. And walking through the Central Valley in those days up to Yosemite was a great pleasure. Of course, it was still very much wild country and teeming with wildlife and rich and vital farms and the like.
Lots of animals, too.
Absolutely.
I mean, grizzly bears, and I mean, this was no easy feat to get here. But when you walked in, I mean, for example, did you just see something like this and just stand in total awe of what you were seeing?
Of course. No one can do otherwise, I think, and even in this day and age, one is very likely to be struck by the same wonderful attributes of this valley that I was struck by. And not only the splendid land features here about, but of course the wildlife and the plant people, all of that excited me very much.
And what was your plan once you got here? Did you have any sort of plan of how you were going to explore this place and what you were going to see and what purpose your being here had?
Well, at first I was simply delighted to be engaged in this incredible wilderness, and when I first came to the Yosemite, I had no employment, so I went back down to the Central Valley and managed to find someone who allowed me to bring 2,050 sheep up into the high country. Well, I was soon disappointed with the activities of the sheep in that high country, and among other things, it caused me to think of what we needed to do to preserve this incredible country.
So you saw the environmental damage done by the sheep.
Oh, I helped participate, to tell you the truth.
Now, is that when the click came in your mind that this whole environmental thing, that we had a responsibility to help preserve places like this?
Well, I think that even from the very beginning, I remember after I had moved from Scotland, from Dunbar up in the North Sea to the wilderness of Wisconsin as a young boy, I remember when I finally left that wilderness that I was very much interested in preserving a meadow that was part of my boyhood and which I thought should be preserved. Unfortunately, it was not, and it was one of my first lessons, I think, in how fragile and how precious our environment is. And when I came here and observed not only the activities of the sheep, which ate every blade of grass, every flower, every shrub, not sparing even the young conifers, and then they would rake and dibble the loose mountain soil to let the spring floods wash it all away. Indeed, in the springtime, here, the Yosemite Fall, not flowing at the moment, but when it was flowing in the spring, with thousands of sheep going across the Yosemite Creek to Tuolumne, the meadows up in the high country, the creek was essentially a mud bath from the hooves generating all of that. Mm-hmm. The damage in the meadow with the early settlers, the cultivation of this land, the animals brought in to help support the early settlers, all of that was causing incredible damage along with lumber people and mining people and the rest.
We're talking about the 1860s, the 1870s, and settlers coming out west didn't have any sense of preserving the environment. They were trying to survive in a harsh environment out here. They weren't thinking about what the sheep were going to do to the meadowlands.
It's true. I think part of it was the wilderness idea from the point of view of settlers in the early days, that it was a harsh environment. I never shared that experience. I always found this a very friendly and non-hostile place, to say the least.
You were approaching it from your viewpoint as someone whose eyes and heart and soul was opened.
And many years of sauntering about these meadows and these canyons.
Where have you been? Where have you not been in Yosemite?
Well, I don't believe we could point to a place in this valley in which I have not been, or any part of the walls here. But I explored the Sierra Nevada rather thoroughly from top to bottom, and spent many months sort of sauntering about, looking for glaciers and counting big trees and doing those things that I thought would be of interest to us geologically and botanically.
And writing them down in these amazing short stories which you have shared with readers all over America and literally all over the world, sharing your adventures and kind of putting a personal face on what you're talking about.
Well, it was a fortunate thing that my experiences appeared to be very popular among especially the magazine readers of the day. It's hard to remember just how popular magazines were and how influential they were, but I happened to write for some of the more significant ones of my day, and as a result, these stories became very popular, and I too, in many ways.
Did you have any idea you were going to become a celebrity in your own right? Because you were, back then, a name that people in this country knew.
Well, I was rather astonished to find my recognition, I suppose, so widespread over the years. Partially it came by meeting some very influential people like Ralph Waldo Emerson over at the Yosemite Fall here, or Teddy Roosevelt up in the high country, and spending a few evenings with him.
Now, what did you talk with Teddy Roosevelt about? Were you lobbying him? Were you soft-selling him? Did you take the time that you had with him to really push your agenda? How did you do it?
No soft-selling whatsoever, and no need to. Roosevelt himself was a very keen outdoorsman, as you know, and he had an abiding faith that the American wilderness should be preserved. And the reason that he contacted me when he became president and asked me to join him for 4 days and 3 nights wandering around alone in this wilderness was because he had read many of my appeals to the American public to help preserve not only this environment but indeed much of our wilderness. And he was very eager to come out. We spent 3 days alone in the wilderness, wandering about, and wound up at Yosemite Point in the middle of a snowstorm. We discussed, among other things, the pending legislation then of what is called the Hetch Hetchy Valley, a sister valley to this one in the Yosemite National Park, which was threatened then by the city of San Francisco's need for water and to store it there and to create electricity there. Well, I managed to extract from Roosevelt the promise that in his presidency that would not be lost to us, and that was a temporary victory, but nonetheless an important one to me.
From those days you spent here in the park with President Roosevelt, did he go back to Washington invigorated, a soldier in your cause, and start causing things to happen that would create national parks all across this country?
Well, he did. Happily for the country, Roosevelt was a man who already was a firm believer in the value of the outdoors and its preciousness to the American people. And we, during our conversations around the campfires, I promoted very heavily the idea of what we should do with our western lands in particular. And he was very receptive to all of that. By the end of his presidency, he had created 5 additional national parks, doubling the number of parks that we had in the country at the time, and had also put nearly 200 million acres of forest land into protection, and he created 51 wildlife refuges. And given the number of animals that Roosevelt managed to destroy in his lifetime, I think a fair swap.
And this all happened at a time where it was critical. These lands, if he hadn't done this at the time he did it, these lands were right on the verge of being snapped up and used and mined and forested and all of this sort of thing.
It's true. They would have been abused, and many have been since, of course, and no doubt the future of many of them is still in doubt of our wilder lands. But and with the current problems of the day, then of course there are threats that I had not imagined in those old days. But as a result of Roosevelt's good work, and especially the last minutes of his presidency, in which he declared a great deal of forest land to be set aside for the common good, it was truly a legacy that no president will ever be able to duplicate.
Where did the Sierra Club connection with you come in? Did you found the Sierra Club?
Well, I did, with a group of people down in San Francisco, and was its first president until my death in 1914. But I had the reason that the Sierra Club was created more than any other was it had its social reasons, but most of the people that were attached to it were very much concerned about the fate of Yosemite and the Sierra Nevada in general. We had already created Yosemite National Park, but there was no defense for the park. It was still being abused by sheep people who were driving the sheep into the high country. Lumber people were nibbling at its edges, and it was we had no National Park Service at the time, and the cavalry was doing the best that they could to take care of the problems that the park was being abused by. And so the Sierra Club was created largely to create a voice for the people who can't speak around us, the plant people and the fellow mortals that we share this place with.
But in those early days, when people thought of environmentalism, when people thought of national parks, they thought of coming out to go camping, to enjoy what nature had. They weren't really thinking so much of preserving it, were they?
It's true that preservation was not part and parcel of the American psyche, I would say. On the other hand, there were many in those early days who really did understand the linkage between recreational possibilities and the preservation of the land.
Did you feel sometimes like oh boy, look at these views out here? I mean, they're so breathtaking, and they're so, I mean, it's so wonderful that they're still here for us to see and enjoy. I just wonder if back in those early days, did you sometimes feel like you were a lone voice in the wilderness, trying to bring this consciousness level up to people?
Well, I did think so at first, but you very quickly acquire allies in good causes, and there were many such. There were the professors in the early California school system. There were just many good people who understood the value preserving this land, and we're eager to do so.
And what role do you think your writings, I mean, I've read so many of your short stories of encounters with bears, being here when an earthquake hit, an avalanche of snow, climbing an ice cone, all these wonderful things that you've written about. What role did those writings have in getting people sensitized to what this was all about?
Oh, I think a great deal. When I first began writing, I tended to write in ways that did not embrace myself very much. I wanted to be a prism through which the light flows, if you will, rather than being a focus myself. And so I wrote, in fact, if you look over the 10 books, 300 articles, and numerous journals that I kept.
Which are still available and are still being read by millions of people today.
They are indeed. Well, if you look them all over, you'll find that there's very little of the episodes that you're describing. I did write some of those for the more popular magazines of the day, and they became very popular writings. In later years, they became more so as they were collected into various books that I managed to assemble. But yeah, I look over these mountains, and everywhere I look, I see the adventures of my life. Right here, for example, at Sentinel Dome was where the earthquake you are describing in 1872 occurred. Perhaps the largest earthquake that ever struck here in California.
And you were here.
I was here. And in fact, I was thrown out of bed in the middle of the night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, moonlit night. And I ran out of my cabin, both glad and frightened, and shouting, a noble earthquake, feeling sure that I was going to learn something. And the shocks were so violent and varied and succeeded one another so closely that I had to balance in walking as if on the deck of a ship among the waves, and I feared that the high cliffs about me might come tumbling down.
Could you hear the echoes with the rocks moving? And
it was as if all the thunder I had ever heard had been condensed into one roar. It knocked off a chunk of rock up here that we used to call the Eagle Rock, and it came down in great piles of the boulders that you see leaning up against the valley walls here. And it came down in an arc of fire, 1,500 feet in span, from the friction of the rocks, and as clear and as smooth as a rainbow. And so after it had landed and crushed a grove of pine trees, filling the air with its odor, and a great cloud of dust come up over the valley that lasted until after sunrise. A significant earthquake.
And you were one of the few people to witness that in this place.
I was. There were very few people living in the valley in 1872, in the wintertime when this happened in March.
And thank you for writing that down and sharing it with all of us.
Delighted.
That must have been an amazing experience. Did you write it down right away while it was still fresh in your mind?
I usually did that. Exactly when I wrote down that material escapes me at the moment, but yes, I tended to write it down immediately in my journals and then rewrite for various books and articles.
Well, we have left the valley floor of Yosemite and traveled several miles up to see another aspect of Yosemite National Park. We're at Glacier Point, which provides one of the true panoramic views of the park that literally take your breath away. Mr. Muir, you would have come up here. You've spent many a day, you told me, just sitting here looking out at all of this that you have discovered.
Well, wherever you find yourself in the Yosemite, it always tends to be the best. A fine place to forget weariness and wrongs and bad business. And Glacier Point was one of those places for me. I used to dash up from the valley on what is now called the 4-mile trail and sit and ponder the studies of glaciology in this very spot.
You became fascinated by the fact that this was all formed by glaciers.
Yes, the theory at the time was that much of this was formed by sort of a cataclysmic process where the roof of the world simply fell in or was split aside in great cracks. But I'd studied a bit of glaciology, and I could see here immediately or such evidence of glacial activity that I quickly challenged that theory and was eventually able to provide a more clear focus of what actually had happened here.
And when you talk about glacial activity, you're talking about the fact that at one point, this whole valley here, all of this, was filled with ice.
Very nearly. The very top of the Half Dome was not subjected to the glacier, but very nearly all of this would have been filled in. And think on it, an ice sheet clasping 1,000 of these mountains in their crystal embrace, carving out these mountain waves and scooping up the lake cups for crystal waters and weaving myriads of these mazy canyons, and then dancing down the mountains and at last creating fields and plants and happy people.
You have such a way with words. You make your thoughts so interesting and so colorful and so intriguing. This is a gift you have.
Well, I was fortunate, I guess, in my early childhood to have a family that valued clear understanding of how to present oneself, and here we are today. Yeah.
I'm just looking out here. You would have covered all of this territory just by foot, just kind of hiking around on your own?
Oh, you could too. It's one of the friendliest, most hospitable environments on the planet. It's a very friendly place.
But you never knew where you were going. You were many times creating your own path, your own trail. You were just roaming all through this country.
That's true, but again, a friendly country is easy to travel through, and there were many a landmark. The Half Dome here, of course, was something that I could observe from many miles away in all directions, and always use it as a focus, and eventually map in my own mind exactly where I was.
You call it friendly, as if it's an animate object, as if it's alive.
Oh, I believe even the granite here is alive in many ways. It speaks to me very eloquently of the process of life in general. But sure, the plant people, the fellow mortals we share it with, and ourselves, humans everywhere, it is a live spot. And this is particularly a live spot.
And when you were sitting here for those days, just contemplating what was in front of you, this site that we're looking at right now hasn't changed in how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of years?
Well, it's been a while. Yes.
Do we know?
Geologists now have a pretty good view of what kind of changes occurred here and over what process. So yes, we do know, but it's still awfully hard to take our little lifetime and measure it against the many thousands of years that have created this landscape.
If you can't be inspired, if you can't become introspective here, I don't know where you'd go.
In fact, I've said very much the same thing many times. If you cannot find happiness in the Yosemite, then you're unlikely to find it anywhere else.
Did you hate to leave here and go back into town, into San Francisco, into the cities of the East where you traveled?
Well, I did do a great deal of traveling after my earliest explorations here, all over the world, in fact. But I always enjoyed the Sierra most, and this was my cathedral. This was my worshipful home.
You always came back home.
I did, and still do.